and the health of our society. Her widely cited research has led to regular speaking engagements at media conferences around the world. Jodie Jackson is a partner at the Constructive Journalism Project, and she holds a master's degree in applied positive psychology. Jodie Jackson is on mission to change the media. Her recent book, You Are What You Read: Why Changing Your Media Diet Can Change the World, is an invitation to become a part of this movement. Jodie Jackson is a news consumer turned author who has spent the last decade researching the psychological impact of news. Through her works, she has shown that the excessive negativity in the news creates a distorted and harmful picture of the world. Jodie believes that we need a better balance in the news and shows why we must widen the media lens to include stories of solutions, progress, and development in order to improve the news industry, our psychological and sociological well-being, and ultimately the world. The topic is impact of constructive journalism on the consumer. Welcome, Jodie.
Hi, thank you for having me. And just to tie it into the whole, fake news, misinformation, kind of where it fits within that space, perhaps it's not necessarily, it's more to do with the consumer, all of my side of things. So even if you have the most accurate storytelling, the highest standard of journalism, if you are only looking at the world through this if it bleeds, it leads mentality, you're only ever seeing a portion of the world. You're not seeing the whole picture. And so as consumers, even if you're providing the most accurate and well-evidenced information, we're still left misinformed because we don't have a balanced and complete picture of the world. So as I said, this is a consumer side of the conversation, and I came into this as a consumer. And that's because I had gotten to the point where I found the news so negative that I couldn't bear to tune in anymore because it made me feel so depressed about the state of the world and just so disappointed about the people in it. And I didn't always feel so strongly. It was a gradual progression that moved me from being someone who watched the news daily to someone who could no longer stand it. And this kind of pivot point worried me because I thought to myself, if I'm motivated to stay informed, but I'm attracted to the idea of ignorance being bliss, how many others felt the same? And when I looked into this, it turns out the answer is a lot. My experience is incredibly common. And in fact, finding the news too depressing is the biggest single reason for audience disengagement. It's not that people aren't interested. It's not that there's other resources competing for their attention. It's that they find the news too depressing. And the second biggest reason was that they feel there's nothing they can do about it. They're disempowered. They're left feeling helpless. And this isn't the only consequence of our if it bleeds, it leads news culture. But before I share with you some of the most common responses to this negativity bias in the news, I should first start by saying that I fully appreciate and understand the value of reporting on problems. And I know it's been covered a lot here by the other speakers, and I'm sure with much of the journalism training that you do. But by asking the challenging questions, highlighting failures, exposing corruptions, making us aware of problems and holding power to account, the news has helped us fight and correct injustice, it's kept people safe, and it's helped drive legislation that ultimately improves society. And, this is largely because unless we're made aware of a problem, we're not in a position to be able to understand it, confront it, and correct it. So it is a good thing. But just because something's good, it doesn't mean its benefits are endless. And when we have too much of it, it moves from being helpful to becoming harmful. And this is where we are now. Mainly, a lot of reasons why is because the media landscape's changed so dramatically in the last 30 years. But I won't go into that now. But the list of responses that I'm about to share with you, they're not just anecdotal. They come from a variety of published research over the last century. And also, just before I share these with you, it's important to know that these aren't the effects of watching just one news story about one problem. It's the effects of the continuous and excessive reporting on problems over a long period of time without a balanced understanding of what's being done about them. So just to go through these, well, the first and foremost is the overwhelming prioritization of problems means that the news, and I touched on this before, but the news is not a reflection of everything that goes on. It's a reflection of everything that goes wrong. So it magnifies stories of problems, wars, corruptions, famines, natural disasters. And then this becomes all that we see as consumers, because at the same time, it minimizes and often ignores stories of solutions, progress, peace building, and development. And so we're left unaware of their existence. And the more we see something, the more common we believe it to be. So in psychology, this is known as the availability theory, how available something is. And similarly, the less we see something, the less common we believe it to be. So this overrepresentation of problems that we see through the news narrative and the underrepresentation of solutions, it creates a very distorted picture of the world, which fundamentally leads us to have an inaccurate understanding of it. And as a result, we often think that the world is in much worse condition than it actually is. And it's not only adults that are affected by this, because children, whether we sort of try and shield them from it or not, children are also affected by this, and they develop this negative filter that they then use to understand the world and make sense of its events. And I'll just share with you a clip, because there was a program on Channel 4 in the UK a couple of years ago called The Secret Life of 6-Year-Olds. And they secretly filmed these children, well, not secretly, but the children were probably less aware of it, at school. And 3 of the children acted out the evening news. So if I can just share my screen with you. And then.
Hello! This is we're back. We're on Sky News. Stop it! I'm trying to eat over here. With me, Elvin, and what's his name? Beatrice. Sorry, I'm just having a snack. Okay.
Oh, he's Sky News.
Yeah, this is a Sky News programme. So they're actually enacting how events are communicated in the adult world.
So, there was a train attack on a French train to Paris. They got the knife and got the gun and stabbed them. And they even killed the conductor. Yeah. Sad news, isn't it?
International terrorism is now becoming a theme of play among 6-year-olds.
I'm not sure I want to think about that.
No, but it does mean it's important to be talking to children about these things so they understand the significance of the event and the value that adults attach to them.
Because they know about it.
They know about it and they're talking about it with each other.
Yes.
Oh, have you seen that blow up in China? Yeah. Because that was on the news before on the telly. There was like a blow up in China. Yeah. Yeah, and like lots of people died. Next, plane attack in Surrey on the S21. They don't know why, but they're going to find out.
So the reason I share that with you is because, you know, from an adult level down to a child's interaction with the news, it's quite shocking to see how normal we find this kind of narrative to be. How when we sort of look beyond our own experience, these are the stories that we're told about the world. And the consequence of viewing the world in this way is that it can make us feel anxious, it can make us feel pessimistic, and it can make us feel depressed. And these feelings linger even when we switch off from the news, because we become so well rehearsed at feeling them. And the way to think of this is like making a mark on a piece of paper. So at first, that mark might be so faint that it's not even noticeable. But if you keep going over that mark again and again and again and again, even with the slightest of pressure, that mark will become more defined and more permanent. And this helps explain why our feelings grow stronger and they last for longer. By continuously witnessing unresolved problems, we can also develop a feeling of helplessness. We develop this defeatist attitude, which Veronique mentioned earlier, where we think that the problems are just too big to solve. And this leads to a decrease in our helpful behavior. But our reduced efforts to help can also be explained because of an increase in feelings of contempt and hostility towards other people. Fear is another common response that can make us withdrawn and unhelpful because it's an emotion that's often generated to protect ourselves. And because we become so self-focused, we actually care less about other people and the problems that they may be facing. But we can also stop caring simply because we become desensitized. We become so used to hearing about the extreme and the extraordinary that it actually becomes very normal and ordinary. So we come to expect these stories of tragedy, crisis, and violence, and they lose their shock value. And ultimately, we may switch off from the news altogether to try and avoid these feelings. And this is where I got to. So having experienced pretty much all of those feelings myself, I felt like the news was no longer helping me connect and contribute to society. It was actually making me withdraw from it. And when I stopped watching the news, people labeled my decision. They called me naive, weak, ignorant, and even extreme. And this reaction that other people had towards me made me feel that I was damaged in some way, that there was something in me that wasn't strong enough or brave enough to see the world in all of its terribly ugly existence. But what I realized when I started researching this quite intensively is that it wasn't me. It was the news industry that was damaged. And this is when I realized that it's not about not watching the news, but it's about consuming it in a different way, in a more deliberate way, in a way that re-empowered me rather than disempowered me. And this is when I came across the concept, although it was before it necessarily had a name, but of solutions journalism. And Vero touched on this really well when she was giving the definition, but we're not talking about lighthearted, uplifting, entertaining, or even feel-good stories. The definition that I use when I talk about it is that it's rigorous journalism that reports critically on tangible progress being made in order for us to understand how issues are being dealt with. So critically, this type of journalism, it still helps us understand the problem. It just recognizes that that's not necessarily the end of the story. And so using all of the techniques that were shared before, you also learn about how these problems are being resolved, what people are doing in response to them, what solutions are being put in place, and you ask if they're working. And from a consumer point of view, this isn't for the purpose of making us feel better. It's actually for the purpose of making us know better by giving us a fuller picture of the world. Feeling better is just a nice side effect of that. So to go into some of the effects that this kind of journalism has on us, what happens to consumers when they include this type of journalism into their media diet. So to understand this better, I created my own research to investigate the perceived effects of solutions on both the readers and the writers of the news. And there is now much more research in the field that supports these findings. But what they reported is it gives them better balance and perspective, and it provides better context. And this balance has been shown to reduce anxiety. It increases feelings of optimism and hope. It improves our mood in the short term and actually shifts our mindset in the long term. Reporting on solutions also provides a restorative narrative. So it restores our faith in humanity. It improves social cohesion and it builds resilience. And one of the key findings of interest to newsrooms and to upcoming journalists and existing journalists is that it's been shown to consistently increase engagement across many different metrics. So readers are more likely to read and share content, stay on an article for longer, feel more informed, have an increased desire to learn more about the issue, and have been shown to be more likely to pay for content. And this increased engagement can foster something in psychology known as active coping. So this is where people actually approach and address problems rather than avoid or ignore them. And this is the result of ultimately feeling more empowered. And this is because learning about solutions increases our feelings of hope, increases our feelings of optimism and self-empowerment. And when we combine these three things together, it allows us to believe that the future can be better than the past. Not that it will be, but that it can be. And it shows that our actions are able to make a difference. And that's important because sometimes we do need to see it to believe it. But if we're instead limiting ourselves to stories of pretty much only problems and failures, it can be difficult to see beyond them. We become trapped in this limited existence that's defined more by learning from what's not worked than from what has. And the problem with this is it's a very slow way to learn. Granted that it provides invaluable lessons that may fire us up to want to do things differently, but it's not the kind of information that unlocks our own sense of potential where we actually feel able to. So one of my research participants that I interviewed about solutions journalism identified this when she said, by highlighting small but significant steps, it exposes the reader to possibility and can empower them to realize their own potential to make a difference. Another said, the action taken may not be directly related to the content of the article, but I'm more inclined to roll up my sleeves and do something about something. So there are some of the anecdotal responses from some consumers that I spoke to. And that's really important, really, because as I think it's the American Press Association defines the news as being there to empower the informed. So feeling empowered through solutions journalism is a really great tool for doing that. But despite the evidence benefits of this kind of reporting, there is still a huge resistance from people both inside and outside of the news to acknowledge success and progress in society. You know, with all of the problems facing the world, being optimistic can be seen at best to be insensitive and at worst to be naive. But it's neither. It's a powerful mental state that helps us constructively engage with a negative reality. And it gives us the courage to persist in the face of problems in order to actually be able to contribute to making the world a better place. And another reason for resistance is that many people in the news industry consider the idea of reporting on solutions to be a substandard form of journalism that will undermine the ongoing suffering that exists and give people a false sense of security. But again, this is totally misguided because learning about solutions does not mean that we become ignorant to problems. It's far from it. You know, solutions don't exist in some altruistic isolation to everything else that's going on in the world. They're very much connected to the problem. We can't learn about the significance of a solution without first understanding the reach of the problem. So one doesn't negate the other. And in fact, we gain a deeper appreciation and understanding by recognizing both how a situation's improved and that a problem still exists, as well as even acknowledging that there's potentially still a long way to go. And besides, without reporting on progress, as consumers, we're left with a false sense of insecurity. And this is what makes people believe that the world is worse than it actually is. Now, I'm mindful of time, so I'm going to I'll sort of sum up here, but this is an incredibly quick summary that in some way oversimplifies the case for solutions journalism. And it can give the impression that I'm saying that reading problems-focused news is bad for us and reading solutions-focused news is good for us. But it's not that simple. We need both. We need balance. And we need to stop discussing problems-focused news versus solutions-focused news as if they're in competition with each other. So rather than force them to compete to decide which is best, we have to allow them to coexist and recognize that they both add value in their own right and that they both have limitations. But the value of negative news and negative news reporting, it's been proven, and it's highly respected in education, in industry, and even in awards ceremonies. But I hope through the work that I'm doing and the work of so many others that are in this space, solutions journalism may soon receive the same credibility and respect. Thank you.
Thank you, Jodie. That was awesome. We have some questions from our participants.